September 19th, 1944, Captain Jimmy Leach sat in his Sherman tank near the French village of Arracourt, staring into a wall of white. The morning fog was so thick he couldn't see 50 yards. It clung to the damp French soil, muting the world. Inside the Sherman, the air was cold and smelled of oil, cordite, and stale sweat. Somewhere out there in that white void, German tanks were moving. His M4 Sherman mounted a short-barreled 75mm gun. Intelligence said the Germans were bringing Panthers, tanks that could kill him from 2,000 meters. His gun couldn't penetrate their frontal hull armor, even at point-blank range. Captain Leach knew the statistics. He knew the Panthers' cannon could punch through his armor before he even saw the muzzle flash. In a Sherman, you don't just die, you burn. Every man in that crew knew it. The loader, the driver, the gunner, they all sat in silence, listening to the static of the radio and the pounding of their own hearts. The fog was the only thing keeping them alive. When it lifted, the math said they would die. But Captain Leach didn't know something. The Germans didn't know something either. What happened in the next 11 days would shatter everything both sides believed about tank warfare. 3 weeks earlier, George Patton's Third Army had been racing across France faster than any army in history. 400 miles in less than a month. Paris liberated. The German army in full retreat. Patton's tankers could see the German border. They could taste victory. Then Eisenhower dramatically cut their fuel. Operation Market Garden was getting everything. Montgomery's airborne assault into Holland would get the gasoline, the ammunition, the supplies. Patton's Third Army would stop and wait. The general was furious. His diary entries from those days were unprintable. But Hitler saw an opportunity. Hitler ordered a counterattack. The Americans had outrun their supply lines. He gave the mission to General Hasso von Manteuffel and the 5th Panzer Army. Von Manteuffel was one of Germany's best armored commanders. He had learned his trade on the Eastern Front against Soviet tank armies. He knew how to destroy enemy armor. The plan was straightforward: smash through the American positions at Arracourt, recapture the city of Luneville, eliminate the American bridgehead over the Moselle River. Von Manteuffel would have 262 tanks and assault guns, 107 Panthers, 75 Panzer IVs, 80 assault guns. Against him stood Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division. They had Shermans. On paper, this wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The Panther tank was designed to kill Shermans. Its high-velocity cannon provided a reach the Americans couldn't match. It could kill a Sherman from across a valley, while American shells would simply bounce off the German steel. The Sherman's short-barreled 75mm gun had a lower muzzle velocity, less penetrating power. Against the Panther's sloped frontal armor, it was nearly useless. American tankers had done the tests. The Sherman's gun couldn't penetrate the Panther's front glacis, even at point-blank range. The only shot was the turret mantlet, and only from under 500 meters. A Panther crew could sit at maximum range and pick off Shermans one by one. The Americans couldn't touch them. This was the equation Captain Leach was staring at through the fog. But equations don't account for everything. Von Manteuffel's tanks were magnificent. His crews were not. The 111th and 113th Panzer brigades had been formed only weeks earlier. Their Panthers had come straight from the factory. The crews had never trained together. They had never fought together. Many had never seen combat at all. The brigade commanders didn't know their subordinates. The tank commanders didn't know their drivers. The gunners had fired their weapons in training, but never at an enemy who shot back. Von Manteuffel knew this was a problem. He had commanded veteran units on the Eastern Front. He understood what green crews meant in combat. But Hitler wanted his counterattack now, not in a month when the crews had trained. Now, von Manteuffel had 8 days to prepare an offensive with units that barely existed. He had to make it work. But looking at his maps, He must have known the truth. He wasn't sending an army into battle. He was sending a generation of teenagers to the slaughter. These weren't faceless enemies. They were 18-year-old boys who had barely learned to drive a car, let alone fight a 45-ton war machine. They had the best tank in the world, and no idea how to keep it alive. The Americans defending Arracourt had their own commander, Major General John S. Wood. His men called him Tiger Jack. Wood was considered one of the best American divisional commanders of the war. Some called him America's Ram. He believed in speed, aggression, and hitting the enemy before they could hit you. His 4th Armored Division had led Patton's charge across France. They had broken through at Avon. They had raced to the Moselle. Now they were stopped, waiting, running low on fuel like everyone else in 3rd Army. Wood hated waiting, but he used the time well. His tankers knew the ground around Arracourt. They knew the ridge lines, the tree lines, the fields of fire. When the Germans came, Tiger Jack's men would be ready. September 18, 1944. The Germans struck first at Luneville. The 111th Punier Brigade hit American cavalry positions with everything they had. Panthers rolling through the morning mist. The American screening force was badly outnumbered, but they fought. By the end of the day, 24 German armored vehicles were burning. The Americans had held. Von Manteuffel adjusted. Luneville was too strong. He would bypass it and strike directly at Arracourt. That night, German columns moved north through the darkness. American commanders didn't know exactly where the blow would fall, but they knew it was coming. Captain Leach and his Shermans waited in the fog. The fog on September 19th was a gift from God. German Panthers began advancing toward American positions at 0800. They expected to use their range advantage, stand off at 1,000 meters, and destroy the Shermans methodically. They couldn't see 200 yards. The Panthers advanced blind. No reconnaissance, no coordination between units. Just columns of tanks rolling into white nothing. Captain Leach heard them before he saw them. The sound of Maybach engines, the squeal of tracks getting closer. Then shapes emerged from the fog. Panthers close enough to touch. At this range, the equation changed. Leach ordered his tanks forward, with guns blazing. The engagement that followed wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was a knife fight in a phone booth. Inside the tanks, the noise was deafening. The clang of breech blocks, the scream of engines, the hammer-blow impact of non-penetrating hits ringing the hull like a church bell. At 50 meters, the Sherman's short 75 millimeters could penetrate a Panther's side armor. At 50 meters, it could punch through the turret. At 50 meters, German technological superiority meant nothing. The Americans weren't shooting at coordinates. They were shooting at shapes looming out of the mist. The Panthers had never trained for this. Their gunners were taught to engage at range. Their commanders expected to see targets at 1,000 meters, not point blank. American Shermans swarmed from the flanks. They used the fog as cover, maneuvering around the German columns. They hit side armor. They hit rear armor. They hit anything they could see. The Panthers tried to react. Some got shots off, but they were disorganized, confused, advancing into ambushes they couldn't see coming. When a Panther was hit at that range, the ammunition often cooked off immediately. The invincible German cats didn't just stop. They erupted. Within hours, 15 Panthers were burning. The survivors retreated over the hills and disappeared into the mist. Round 1 went to the Americans. Leach's company had lost 3 Shermans. Von Manteuffel didn't stop. He couldn't. Hitler expected results. The counteroffensive offensive had to succeed. On September 20th, the Germans attacked again. More Panthers, more fog. Same result. American tankers had figured out the game. Stay hidden. Let the Germans advance blind. Hit them from the sides when they couldn't see you coming. The Sherman's weakness was frontal engagements at range. So don't fight frontal engagements at range. It was simple. It was brutal. It worked. But the fog wouldn't last forever. Von Manteuffel knew that if the weather cleared, his Panthers could finally use their range advantage. He just needed the skies to open. The Americans had another advantage the Germans couldn't match: artillery coordination. When German tanks approached American positions, every Sherman could call for fire support. High-quality FM radios connected every tank to the artillery batteries behind them. Within minutes, 105mm shells would be falling on the attackers. The M7 Priest, self-propelled howitzers of the 4th Armored, could reposition quickly and mass fires on any threatened sector. One engagement saw German Panthers penetrating close to CCA headquarters. The situation looked desperate. Then a battalion of priests engaged the Panthers with direct fire. Point-blank artillery against tanks. The Germans broke off. Manteuffel's crews had nothing like this coordination. Their artillery was scattered, poorly supplied, unable to concentrate when needed. Every American tanker had an army behind him. Every German tanker was essentially alone. September 25, 1944. The fog finally lifted. Von Manteuffel must have felt relief. Finally, his gunners could see. Finally, his Panthers could use their range advantage. Then he heard the engines. P-47 Thunderbolts of the 19th Tactical Air Command had been grounded for days, waiting for the weather to clear. Now they came in waves. Each Thunderbolt carried rockets and bombs designed to kill tanks. They dove on German columns caught in the open fields around Arracourt. Panthers that couldn't be killed by Shermans burned under rocket attacks. Supply trucks exploded. Ammunition carriers detonated. The clear weather that was supposed to save the Germans destroyed them instead. Von Manteuffel watched his offensive disintegrate from the air. By late September, the 2 Panzer brigades were shattered. Von Manteuffel called in the 11th Panzer Division to cover the retreat. These were veterans. They had fought across Russia. They knew how to handle American armor. But even the 11th Panzer couldn't reverse 11 days of disaster. Their mission wasn't to win anymore. It was to save what was left of the 5th Panzer Army from complete annihilation. They succeeded in that barely. The survivors pulled back, leaving the fields around Arracourt littered with burning Panthers. When the smoke cleared, the numbers told the story. Of the 262 German tanks and assault guns committed to the battle, 86 were permanently destroyed. Over 100 more were damaged, broken down, or abandoned in the retreat. The 5th Panzer Army had only 62 operational vehicles left. The Americans lost 25 medium tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The kill ratio was roughly 4-1 in America's favor. This was the same Sherman tank that everyone said was a death trap. The same Sherman that couldn't penetrate Panther armor. The same Sherman that just destroyed 2 Panzer brigades. German generals spent years after the war explaining what went wrong at Arracourt. The fog, the inexperienced crews, the piecemeal attacks, the lack of reconnaissance. All true, all factors, but the deeper truth was simpler. The Germans had better tanks. The Americans had better tactics and combined arms. 4 Manteuffel Panthers attacked with almost no infantry support and 0 reconnaissance. They were tank-heavy brigades charging blind. The Americans used infantry, tank destroyers, and artillery in a defensive web. Every German thrust ran into overlapping fields of fire. The lack of training proved fatal. Blind and disjointed, German columns ran headlong into a cohesive American defense. They expected technology to win the battle for them. The Americans expected nothing. They used what they had: inferior tanks, superior coordination, artillery on call, and tankers who knew every ridge and tree line around Arracourt. When technology met tactics, tactics won. The Battle of Arracourt shattered the last major German counteroffensive in France before the Ardennes. Von Manteuffels' Panzer brigades were destroyed as fighting forces. Yet today, This victory is a historical footnote. Why? Because of what happened next. While the smoke was clearing at Arracourt, the world was watching Operation Market Garden in Holland. Then came the Battle of the Bulge, bigger, louder, and more famous. Arracourt was forgotten. The U.S. Army's largest tank battle until the Bulge simply faded into the history books. The paradox is that even the Germans claimed success here. They noted that Patton's Third Army had stopped. They believed their defense had halted the American drive. But Patton didn't stop because of the Germans. He stopped because Eisenhower cut his gas. The Americans knew the truth. They had fought on the enemy's terms against the enemy's superior machines in 4-1. For 80 years, enthusiasts have debated the Sherman versus Panther matchup. They compare armor thickness and muzzle velocity like baseball statistics. They argue that on paper, the Americans should have lost, but battles aren't fought on paper. Captain Jimmy Leach didn't care about muzzle velocity when he was staring into the fog on September 19th. He cared about his crew. He cared about his orders. He survived the war. He lived to be 87 years old, carrying the memory of the burning metal in the mist in Lorraine. He survived because the inferior Sherman was part of a superior system, a system of artillery, air power, and tactical flexibility that the Germans couldn't match. The myth of the invincible Tiger and Panther persists in video games and movies. It's a seductive story, the terrifying, unstoppable German machine. But the men who fought at Arracourt proved the myth wrong. They took the death trap into the fog and destroyed a Panzer Army. That is the lesson of Arracourt. Technology is just a tool. The best tank doesn't win.